In the teaching guides, what we do is to talk about our personal experiences. So for example, we would try examples of, say, differentiated goods using bottled water, but actually maybe for kids nowadays, they actually are more into tap water because that's the cooler thing to do. That kind of feedback that we get, we put into the teaching guides as our students sort of reporting this kind of thing, and the hope is that teachers can use that experience going forward. One of the most interesting things about the core material, I think, is that from the very beginning, from Unit 1 actually, there are the big themes about sort of the world around us that students can get into. So Unit 1 is all about capitalism, the history of world growth, and of course inequality, which has gone hand in hand. That theme, even when we're introducing more technical things like game theory, that bigger theme comes in, and it's quite easy to see how bargaining, for example, power structures, the labor market play into that discussion. So we start with the big discussion about here's the hockey stick of history, here's what's happened to growth and inequality, and then we as economists try to get into the nitty-gritty of why it's happened, how can we explain what has happened in the world around us. The interesting thing about core also is that while we're developing these so-called microstructures or these micro foundations of theory, we're actually looking forward to what typically another intro course would call macro. So in particular, we look at the labor market in great detail. We look at incomplete contracts and therefore equilibrium unemployment in the labor market. And the reason for doing that is A, because it's interesting, because that's how labor markets actually work, but also because we want to take that information, what we learned there, and talk about unemployment on a more macro scale as well. So there are huge linkages across the so-called micro and macro material, which means that if you wanted to separate them out, you could easily do so. In the teaching guides that the Teaching and Learning Committee and I produce, what we do is to flag up some of those differences in the teaching guide, some of those links in the teaching guide, just to say that, well, now we're looking at unemployment from a macro point of view. However, remember that we've developed the micro foundations for this in unit so-and-so. So what you could do if you're teaching only the macro bit of it is to just go back to that unit, and we provide those linkages in the teaching guide as well. How would you actually work a path through the book if you were only teaching a one semester course for particular students with particular interests, for example?